The button was a joke. It was big and red and comical, like something you'd see in a Saturday morning cartoon right before the coyote fell off a cliff. It sat under a clear plastic cover on a console that smelled of ozone and old coffee. Frank's job for the last 72 hours had been to stare at that button. He was not supposed to touch it. He was not supposed to even think about touching it. His job was to make sure all the little green lights above it stayed green. That was it. He was a glorified light bulb watcher. Frank Miller, 38 years old, divorced, behind on his car payments, and currently the most important man in the known universe. That was another joke, and it wasn't funny at all. The room was deep, so deep underground that the concept of ground was a distant memory. They called the facility the Quarry. It had been carved out of the bedrock of the Nevada desert a century ago, a forgotten relic of a forgotten war. The air was perpetually recycled, tasting faintly of metal and the sweat of nervous men. The only sound was the low, constant hum of the servers and the frantic, tinny voice spilling from the speaker on the wall. This is the final broadcast of the Vex Imperium to the vermin of Sol. -3, the voice said. It was impossibly deep and resonant, a voice that had been designed to crush hope. It spoke perfect, unaccented English, which somehow made it worse. Your planetary quarantine begins in one standard cycle. Your breeding cycles will be halted. Your off-world expansion will cease. Your species will be contained, observed, and allowed to expire. This is not a negotiation. This is a mercy. Acknowledge your compliance. The message had been on a loop for 3 days. 3 days of the world holding its breath. Frank had watched the news feeds on a secondary monitor. Riots in Mumbai, prayers in Vatican City, strange, silent gatherings in Tokyo. The Vex fleet was a collection of geometric impossibilities hanging in high orbit, blotting out the stars. They hadn't fired a shot. They just waited, their patience as vast and cold as the space between worlds. General Eva Madsen stood behind him. She hadn't slept in 3 days either. Her uniform was crisp, but her eyes were old road maps of exhaustion and despair. She smelled of strong black coffee and something else. Something like burnt steel. She was the one who would give the order. Frank was just the guy with the screwdriver and the checklist. He made sure the joke button was connected to the punchline. "Status, Frank," she said. Her voice was gravel. "All green, General," he said, not taking his eyes off the board. "The package is stable. The delivery system is primed. The nav computer has locked onto the rendezvous point." He used the official words. Package. Delivery system. Rendezvous point. He didn't say the real words. The monster. The suicide ship. The heart of their fleet. Any fluctuations in the containment field? None, Frank said. Rock solid. Dr. Thorne built this thing to last. Madsen made a small sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a sob. Dr. Thorne also thought he was building a power source. He thought he was going to give us the stars. Instead, he gave us a loaded gun and told us to never, ever point it at ourselves. Frank thought of the video logs he'd been forced to watch as part of his briefing. The grainy black and white footage of a man losing his mind. Dr. Aris Thorne, his eyes wide with the terror. Frank was only now beginning to understand. "It is not a star," Thorne had whispered in the last entry, his face half in shadow. "It is a mouth. It is hunger given a shape. I have put a leash on God's rabid dog, and the leash is made of string." The speaker on the wall crackled to life with a new voice, a human voice. It was the president. His voice was thin stretched to its breaking point. General Madsen, you have the final authorization. The vote is unanimous. A pause, filled with the static of a whole world's grief. May God forgive us. The line went dead. The Vex ultimatum began its loop again. This is the final broadcast of the Vex Imperium. Madsen placed a hand on Frank's shoulder. It was heavy. The weight of 8 billion lives was in that hand. Frank flinched. "It's time, son," she said softly. Frank felt his throat close up. He was just a tech. He fixed things. He followed schematics. He wasn't supposed to be here. He should be at home, watching a ball game, drinking a beer. He thought of his daughter, Emily, living with her mom in Sacramento. He hoped she was looking at the sky. He hoped she wasn't. "General," he heard himself say, his voice a stranger's. "Are we sure? Is there nothing else?" Madsen didn't answer for a long moment. He could feel her gaze on the back of his neck. "They call us vermin," she said finally, her voice harder than the bedrock around them. "They plan to watch us wither and die in our cage. They think we're animals. They're about to learn we're something else entirely." She took her hand off his shoulder. They sent an ultimatum. She walked over to the console. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She lifted the clear plastic cover over the red button. The click echoed in the silent room. "Humanity," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "sends a reply." She didn't slam the button, she didn't hesitate. She just pressed it, firmly, quietly. A single light on Frank's board turned from green to red. It was the launch indicator. On his secondary screen, a schematic showed a single ugly cargo hauler, the Odysseus, detaching from a hidden dock on the dark side of the moon. It was slow, it was old, and it was carrying a leash made of string. Frank looked at his hands. They were shaking. He had checked the circuits. He had tightened the bolts. He had made sure the signal would get through. He was an accomplice to the murder of a star system. The Vex ultimatum droned on, a ghost voice for a ghost fleet. Frank Miller, the light bulb watcher, closed his eyes and prayed for the first time since he was a child. He didn't pray for forgiveness. He prayed that it would be quick. 2 weeks earlier, the sky had broken, not with a bang, but with a crack. It was a Tuesday. Frank was arguing with his landlord over a plumbing issue when it happened. One moment, the sky was a familiar hazy blue. The next, it fractured. That was the only word for it. A web of black lines, like cracks in a sheet of glass, spread across the upper atmosphere. There was no sound, no tremor. Just a silent, geometric wrongness that made your teeth ache. Panic was a slow rolling wave. At first, it was just confusion. News channels showed astronomers pointing telescopes, their faces pale with disbelief. Then the Vex came through the cracks. Their ships weren't ships. They were statements. Perfect spheres of obsidian black, tetrahedrons that spun with a dizzying, unnatural rhythm, and one massive central vessel shaped like a spike or a thorn, a mile long, and radiating a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. They arranged themselves in a precise mathematical formation around the Earth and Moon. Then came the message. It didn't come over the radio or the internet. It came into every head. Every single human being heard the voice at the same time in their own language. It was a violation so profound that millions collapsed on the spot, their minds unable to process the intrusion. Frank had been driving to work. He'd swerved his car into a ditch, the voice of physical presence inside his skull, calm, superior, and utterly devoid of empathy. "We are the Vex Imperium. Your period of chaotic, unchecked growth is over. The voice explained things with the patience of a biologist explaining a lab protocol to a rat. The galaxy was a carefully curated garden. Humanity was an invasive weed, a particularly noisy, aggressive, and unpredictable weed. Our radio signals were a chaotic screech. Our expansion into our own solar system was a symptom of a disease. We were a blight. The ultimatum wasn't for surrender. The Vex did not want to rule Earth. They had no interest in our resources or our cultures. They were cosmic gardeners, and they were here to prune. The terms were laid out with chilling clarity. First, the quarantine. Earth would be surrounded by a permanent energy field. Nothing in, nothing out. Forever. Second, the cessation. All spacefaring activities were to cease immediately. Satellites would be allowed for planetary communication, but nothing beyond the moon's orbit. The fledgling colonies on Mars and the asteroid belt were declared void. Their inhabitants were to be returned to Earth. Third, the sterilization. This was the one that broke the world. The Vex would introduce a tailored retrovirus into the atmosphere. It would not kill anyone. It would simply render 99% of the human population sterile. The birth rate would plummet to near zero. A few, a carefully selected few, would be allowed to breed. To keep the species alive for observation, humanity would become a living museum exhibit. A planet-sized terrarium for a dying race. You have 10 standard planetary rotations to show your compliance, the voice in the head concluded. Begin dismantling your space assets. Prepare your population. Non-compliance will be met with immediate, system-wide sanitation. Your continued, albeit limited, existence is a mercy. Do not mistake it for weakness. Then the voice was gone, leaving behind a silence that was louder than any scream. The world did not unite. It shattered. Some factions screamed for war, a glorious last stand against the impossible invaders. Others argued for compliance, for survival at any cost. What was a sterile future compared to no future at all? Frank watched it all unfold from his little apartment. The television, a constant stream of talking heads and grainy cell phone footage of riots. The Vex just waited. Their silent, perfect ships were a constant reminder of their power. They didn't need to demonstrate it. Their presence was enough. The call had come for Frank on the 5th day. A black, unmarked car pulled up outside his building. A man in a simple suit knocked on his door. He didn't introduce himself. He just said, "Mr. Miller, your country needs you." Frank had been an avionics engineer for a subsidiary of a subsidiary of a subsidiary of a defense contractor. He thought they wanted him to work on some newfangled missile defense system. A pointless gesture. They didn't take him to a shiny base. They took him to the quarry. A place that wasn't on any map. A place that had been officially decommissioned in the 22nd century. General Madsen met him at the entrance. "Forget everything you think you know," she told him, her face grim. "We're not going to fight their ships. We're not going to shoot at them. We're going to give them something they can't comprehend." She led him down into the earth, through corridors thick with the dust of ages. She took him to the central chamber, a vast cavern filled with humming, archaic machinery. In the center, suspended in a web of magnetic coils and energy beams, was a sphere. It was no bigger than a basketball, and it was the blackest thing Frank had ever seen. It didn't reflect light. It consumed it. It was a spot of absolute nothing. "Meet the Thorn device," Madsen had said. "Project Pitch Black. The official story is that it was an attempt to create a stable miniature black hole for energy production. A project that failed catastrophically. "What's the real story?" Frank had asked, unable to tear his eyes away from the sphere of nothing. "The real story," Madsen said, her voice low, "is that it didn't fail, it worked perfectly. Dr. Thorne created a self-sustaining microscopic singularity, a pinprick of forever. He created a pocket universe of pure hunger. He spent the last 20 years of his life building the cage around it, this facility. Not to keep us out, but to keep it in." Frank felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the Vex. "And what do you want me to do?" "Dr. Thorne is long dead. The people who built this are all gone. The schematics are a century old. You, Mr. Miller, are the best damn avionics and systems integration tech we have. You are going to help us check the cage. And then," she took a deep breath, "you are going to help us figure out how to open it." Frank looked from the impossible sphere of black to the general's hard, determined face. He thought of the voice in his head. "Vermin!" He thought about a future with no children's laughter. "Okay," he said. The word felt small and foolish in the vast, humming cavern. "Okay." The quarry was a tomb. It smelled like one. A deep, subterranean smell of cold stone, damp air, and something else, something metallic and faintly bitter, like old blood. For a week, Frank lived and breathed that smell. He slept on a cot in a small windowless room, the hum of the facility's life support, a constant lullaby. He ate gray, tasteless nutrient paste. His only company was a handful of other grim-faced technicians, and the ghost of General Madsen, who seemed to be everywhere at once. His world shrank to the main containment chamber. The place was a relic. The computers used vacuum tube logic gates alongside quantum processors. Thick bundles of copper wiring ran next to delicate fiber optic lines. It was a technological Frankenstein. A machine built in layers by different generations, each adding their own patch to contain the thing in the middle. The thing. Frank tried not to call it that. The official name was the Thorne Singularity. The techs called it the Maw. Frank just thought of it as the hole, a hole in the world. He spent his days crawling through service tunnels, checking power conduits that crackled with barely contained energy. He found a note scrawled in a margin by some long-dead engineer. Field integrity at 99.9%. Ares says the 0.1% is where God hides. Frank didn't know what that meant, but it made his skin crawl. The containment was a masterpiece of paranoia. There were 9 separate fields, each powered by its own independent geothermal generator. A magnetic field, a gravitational field, a temporal dilation field that literally slowed down time within a few feet of the singularity, making it age slower than the universe around it. It was like a set of Russian nesting dolls, each one designed to catch the monster if the one inside it broke. "It's not about power," Frank explained to a younger tech named Chen, who looked about ready to bolt. "It's about balance. The fields don't just push, they pull, they squeeze it from all sides equally. They have to be perfectly, absolutely synchronized. If one field fluctuates by even 0.1%, the whole thing loses equilibrium." "And what happens then?" Chen asked, his eyes wide. Frank pointed to a thick, lead-lined blast door at the far end of the chamber. "That door leads to a tunnel. The tunnel leads 5 miles straight up to the desert floor. The final fail-safe. If containment is breached, the system is designed to vent the singularity straight up. It would turn a 50-mile radius of Nevada into a crater of smoking glass, but it would save the planet." That's the fail-safe? Chen whispered, horrified. That's the good option, Frank said grimly. The bad option is that it stays here and eats the world from the inside out. Madsen wanted more than a status check. She wanted to weaponize it. She wanted to take the most dangerous thing humanity had ever created, a thing so lethal it was buried under a mountain, and mail it to the enemy. The delivery system is the Odysseus, she told him in one of their brief meetings. She projected a schematic onto the wall. It was a standard long-haul freighter, a piece of junk, really. It's been secretly retrofitted for years. A just-in-case project. Its cargo bay has been converted into a portable version of this containment chamber. A portable version? Frank was aghast. General, the containment here is the size of a stadium and powered by the Earth's core. You can't just put that in a box. Not the whole thing, Madsen admitted. Just the essentials. A travel cage. It's powered by its own fusion reactor. It's designed to hold the Maw for about 72 hours. After that, the power cells will decay, the fields will collapse, and the cage will open. 72 hours, a cosmic time bomb. And how do we get it from here to there? Frank asked, dreading the answer. That's the tricky part, Madsen said. We can't just move it. The singularity is tied to the facility's temporal field. It's drop cold anchored. We have to shut down the main containment, transfer the singularity to the ship's portable unit, and launch. And we have to do it fast. From the moment we start the transfer sequence, we're on the clock. Every second the main field is down is a risk. A risk. That was the understatement of the millennium. It was like trying to move a drop of acid from one glass to another, using nothing but your bare hands. The final piece of the puzzle was the most terrifying. It was what made Frank's blood run cold every time he thought about it. The Odysseus had no crew. It would be remotely piloted, but it had a FTL drive, a primitive human hyperdrive, a jump drive that tore a brutal, messy hole in space-time to get from A to B. It was nothing like the Vex's elegant reality-bending drives. It was a sledgehammer. The jumped drive, Madsen explained, is wired directly into the containment unit. The final jump, the one into the middle of their fleet, will draw its power directly from the fusion reactor. The power drain will be catastrophic. It will instantly destabilize the containment fields. Frank stared at her, understanding dawning. So the act of arriving is the trigger. Exactly, Madsen said. The ship arrives, the fields collapse, the cage opens. It's the universe's most violent jack-in-the-box. Frank looked at the little black hole hanging there in its web of energy, silent and patient. It had been waiting for 100 years, waiting in the dark, a forgotten weapon from a war that never happened. Now the Vex had come bringing a new war. They thought they knew what monsters looked like. They had seen humanity's anger, our fear, our desperation. But they had never seen our darkness. Not the real, absolute, all-consuming darkness we kept buried under a mountain. To understand the machine, Frank had to understand its creator. General Madsen gave him access to the archives. Not the sanitized official files, but Dr. Aris Thorne's personal logs. They were a mix of typed reports, audio diaries, and grainy, flickering video recordings. Watching them was like watching a man's soul slowly unravel. The first video was from the beginning. A younger Thorne, his face alight with manic genius, stood before a blackboard covered in equations that made Frank's head spin. He was brilliant and arrogant. They said it was impossible, Thorne declared to the camera. his voice booming with triumph. To create a stable, Kugelblitz-style singularity. A black hole born not of matter, but of pure energy. A sun in a bottle, infinite, clean power. I have done it. Today I become Prometheus. He gestured wildly at the containment ring, which at that point was a much smaller, simpler device. The energy required was immense, but the result? The result is a pinprick of space-time, so dense it is self-sustaining, a perfect microscopic engine. Frank fast-forwarded through months of logs. The tone began to change. The triumphant declarations gave way to confused notes. Anomaly in the energy readings, a later audio log noted. Thorne's voice now laced with frustration. The output is not what the models predicted. It's quota. Ichiamoko, bordergated it's lesses. As if the singularity is Wealthma. S. Consuming some of the energy we're feeding it. Keeping it for itself. Impossible. The video logs became more infrequent. When Thorne did appear, he looked thinner. The arrogant fire in his eyes was replaced by a haunted, obsessive gleam. The camera was often shaky. "It's not an engine," he whispered in one recording, his face pale in the harsh light of the lab. He was staring at the black sphere, which was now housed in a much larger, more complex array. "An engine does work. This does nothing. It just is, and it does nothing. It just is, and it's for a microsecond." The sensors picked up a gravitational distortion spike that was 1,000 times more powerful than it should have been. It's like it was reaching, testing the bars of its cage. Frank felt a chill. He was sitting in that same room a century later, listening to a ghost's warning. The final logs were terrifying. Thorne had aged decades in a few short years. His hair was white, his hands trembled. He no longer looked at the camera, but past it, as if seeing something in the shadows of the room. "I call it the maw now," he said in a hushed, raspy voice. The audio was poor, full of static. "That's what it is. A mouth. It has no properties we can measure. No temperature, no charge, no spin. It is only a boundary, an event horizon, a door from our universe into somewhere else. Somewhere cold, somewhere empty." He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes wide and feverish. "I made a mistake. I thought I was Prometheus, bringing fire to mankind. But I am Pandora. I have opened a box I cannot close. The containment field. This whole facility. It's not a power plant, it's a prison. And the sentence is eternal." The last video was almost unwatchable. The camera was on the floor, pointed up at the ceiling. The only light was a single red emergency bulb. Alarms were blaring in the background. Thorne wasn't in the shot, but his voice was there, a panicked, breathless whisper. "Field cascade failure in Ring 7. It's learning. God help me, it's learning how to push back. It's not just a physical thing. It's Tor, aware of the cage. It hates the cage." There was a loud, metallic screech, followed by a sound like tearing fabric. "I have to engage the final protocol, the magnetic seal. It will entomb it. It will entomb me. Better me then." Everyone. A long silence. Then, one final whispered sentence. So quiet Frank had to turn the volume all the way up. "Don't ever let it out. Don't ever let it out. It's not a weapon. It's the end of the war. It's the end of all wars. It's the end of everything." The video cut to static. Frank sat back in his chair. the hum of the modern-day facility, seeming flimsy and inadequate. He felt a profound, bone-deep fear that was colder and sharper than anything the Vex had inspired. The Vex were invaders. They were comprehensible. They wanted to put humanity in a cage. But the thing in the next room, it wasn't an invader, it was a law of physics that had been twisted into something malevolent. It didn't want to cage humanity. It wanted to eat the cage and the planet and the stars themselves. He looked at the schematics for the Odysseus on his screen. The travel cage looked so fragile, so temporary. Madsen and the leaders of the world saw a weapon of last resort, a way to fight back, a defiant cry into the dark. But Ares Thorn had seen the truth. This wasn't a weapon. It was a suicide note. Not just for humanity, but for whatever part of the galaxy it was unleashed in. They weren't sending a message of defiance. They were sending a plague of absolute nothing. A hungry ghost to haunt the Vex fleet. He picked up his comm unit, his hand shaking. "General Madsen," he said, his voice hoarse. "You need to see this." He knew it wouldn't change anything. The decision was already made. The course was set. But she needed to know. They all needed to know. They weren't just pressing a button to launch a ship. They were pulling the pin on a grenade that could unmake reality. And Frank Miller, the man who checked the wiring, was the one who had to make sure it would go off without a hitch. The debate was not held in a grand hall or a high-tech situation room. It took place in a sterile, white bunker deep beneath the Cheyenne mountain complex. A conference call. The faces of the world's last leaders flickered on a large screen. The President of the United States, the Chancellor of the European Federation, the Premier of the Pan-Asian Coalition. They were ghosts on a screen, their faces drawn and pale, their authority rendered meaningless by the alien ships in the sky. General Madsen stood before the screen, a lone figure in the Stark Room. Frank was there too, standing by the wall. He was the technical expert. He was there to answer questions about what they were proposing to do. He felt like an executioner explaining the mechanics of the guillotine. "The plan is codenamed Hades," Madsen began, her voice steady and firm, betraying none of the doubt Frank knew she felt. She had watched Thorn's final log. Her face had been a mask of stone. "We use the Thorn singularity. We deliver it to the heart of the Vex command structure. The estimated yield is total." The word hung in the air. Total. The German Chancellor was the first to speak, his face a mess of conflicted emotions. "General, we have seen the files, the warnings from its creator. You are not talking about a bomb. You are talking about, I don't know what to call it, a hole in the universe. What are the risks? The unintended consequences?" "The risks are absolute," Frank heard himself say. All eyes, both in the room and on the screen, turned to him. He felt his collar tighten. Dr. Thorn believed the singularity was not just a gravitational phenomenon. He believed it was hostile. He theorized it was a puncture into a different kind of space-time, one where the laws of thermodynamics are reversed. An existence of pure entropy. "In English, Mr. Miller," the President said, his voice weary. "It doesn't just destroy things," Frank said, struggling for the right words. "It erases them. Matter, energy, time, information. It all just stops. The unintended consequences? We don't know. No one has ever done this before. We could be ripping a hole in the fabric of reality. We could be ringing a dinner bell for things we can't even imagine." A heavy silence fell over the room. The leaders looked at each other, their pixelated faces a portrait of damnation. The Premier of the Coalition. A woman with iron gray hair and piercing eyes spoke next. Her voice was cold. The Vex offer us a slow death, a quiet fading into nothing. They will neuter us, cage us, and watch us die out like the last passenger pigeons. It is an existence of utter humiliation. This, the Hades. It is a quick death. But it is a death on our own terms. A final, defiant scream. It's murder-suicide on a cosmic scale, the Chancellor shot back. We have no idea what this will do to the Vex. We assume it will destroy them. What if it just... trauma? What if it opens a door for them into somewhere worse? We are talking about forces we do not comprehend. We comprehend the Vex, Madsen cut in, her voice sharp as glass. We comprehend their ultimatum. They have judged us. They have sentenced us. They are waiting for us to lie down and accept it. I, for one, will not. We are not animals in a zoo. We are human beings. We have a right to choose our own end. The president sighed a long, ragged sound. He looked older than he had a week ago. He looked ancient. The alternative is to do nothing, to accept their terms, to become a footnote in some alien's textbook. The humans of Sol -3, a promising but ultimately failed species. See Appendix B for cultural notes. Is that how we want to be remembered? We won't be remembered at all, Frank muttered, too low for anyone but himself to hear. There will be no one left to remember us. The debate raged for an hour. It was a circular argument of despair. The slow, certain death versus the fast, uncertain one. Honor versus survival. A final roar versus a final whimper. Frank listened, his stomach churning. These people were deciding the fate of everything, and they were doing it based on fear and pride. He couldn't blame them. What other choice did they have? Finally, the president held up a hand. The phantoms on the screen fell silent. We will vote, he said. There is nothing more to say. All in favor of authorizing Operation Hades, say aye. One by one, the voices came. I, the coalition premier, firm without hesitation. I, a reluctant, choked voice from the African Union representative. I, the South American delegate. It went on. A chorus of damnation. Frank felt each A like a physical blow. The Chancellor of Europe was last. He was silent for a long time. His image flickered. Gott might uns, he whispered. God be with us. Aye. The president looked at General Madsen. His eyes were hollow. The decision is made, General. You have your authorization. The blood of this galaxy is on our hands. The screens went blank, leaving Madsen and Frank alone in the white, silent room. The weight of the decision seemed to suck the very air from the space. Madsen turned to Frank. Her face was unreadable. You heard them, Mr. Miller. Get the package ready for delivery. Frank nodded numbly. The debate was over. The choice was made. Humanity had looked at the two paths before it. One was a long, slow walk into a cage. The other was a leap off a cliff into an abyss of unknown depth. They had chosen to jump, and Frank was the one who had to go to the edge and make sure the fall was a clean one. The transfer was the most terrifying 90 seconds of Frank's life. The entire quarry seemed to hold its breath. The main lights in the containment chamber dimmed, replaced by the stark, pulsing red of the emergency strobes. The deafening hum of the 9 containment fields spooled down. The silence it left behind more menacing than any noise. For 90 seconds, the only thing holding the Maw in place was a single, primary magnetic bottle. A flicker, a power surge, A stray cosmic ray, and it would all be over. Frank stood at his console, his sweat-soaked fingers flying over the controls. He wasn't directing the transfer. The automated systems were doing that. He was the fireman, ready to hit the abort sequence that would slam the main fields back online if anything went wrong. He watched the sensor readings on his screen, a tiny, glowing dot, representing the singularity was being guided by magnetic fields down a shielded conduit. It moved from the heart of the cavern towards a docking bay, where the ugly, battered snout of the Odysseus was pressed against a reinforced airlock. The ship's portable containment unit, powered by its own miniature sun, was waiting, its own fields reaching out like a hand to receive the payload. "Transfer at 50%, a synthesized voice announced calmly. "Shipboard containment field is stable, synchronizing harmonics." Frank's heart hammered against his ribs. He could feel it. A subtle pressure in the air, a weird feeling in his inner ear like the facility was tilting. The gravity plating was working overtime to compensate for the naked influence of the singularity. He imagined the black pinprick moving through the tunnel. A spot of pure nothingness, a piece of anti-creation, sliding through a pipe like it was being sent through a pneumatic tube at a bank. 75%. Handshake is complete. The package is crossing into the ship's containment. Madsen's voice crackled in his ear from the command center. "One level up. Stay on it, Miller. Don't you dare blink." Blink? Frank felt like his eyes had been surgically propped open. He could see Dr. Thorne's face whispering his warnings. "It hates the cage." The dot on his screen settled into the center of a new diagram, the one representing the Odysseus's cargo bay. "Transfer complete," the voice announced. "The package is secure in the portable unit. All readings are green, spooling up the facility's main containment fields." The deep hum returned, and the red strobes gave way to the normal, steady white light. The pressure in Frank's ears vanished. He sagged against his console, his legs weak with relief. The monster was in the box. The box was on the truck. Now they just had to drive it off the cliff. The launch was anticlimactic. There was no fiery spectacle. The Odysseus simply detached from its hidden lunar dock and powered up its conventional engines. It was disguised as an asteroid hauler that had suffered a navigation malfunction. On the main screen in the quarry's command center, they watched it crawl away from the moon, a single insignificant blip on the long-range sensors. The Vex took notice, but without alarm. Their comms were being monitored by a deep space listening post. Frank, Madsen, and a dozen other silent, stone-faced officers listened to the translated chatter. "Unidentified human vessel, registry unknown, departing lunar orbit on an erratic vector," a calm Vex voice reported. "Analysis?" another deeper voice asked. The commander, Zelos. "Primitive ion drive. Hull composition is common steel alloy. No detectable weapon signatures. Life support is minimal. No biological signs aboard. Appears to be automated." There was a pause. Frank could almost hear the alien equivalent of a shrug. "It is a gnat," Zelos said, his voice dripping with casual contempt. A final, pathetic gesture of defiance. "Perhaps they are trying to ram us. How quaint. Let it come. Let the vermin see how futile their struggles are up close. Maintain passive sensor lock. Do not waste the energy to destroy it until it is within the primary defense perimeter." Madsen clenched her fist on the console. "That's it," she whispered. "They're taking the bait." The Odysseus crept across the void. It took 27 hours to reach the designated jump point, a carefully calculated spot just outside the Vex's main defensive line. 27 hours of Frank watching the green lights of the ship's containment unit, praying they didn't flicker. Every 10 minutes, a status update pinged back. All systems nominal. Containment at 99.99%. Fuel cells stable. It was the longest day of Frank's life. He drank coffee until his teeth buzzed. He paced the confines of the command center. He thought about Emily. He wondered what she would think of her father, the man who helped load a black hole onto a spaceship. Would she understand? Would there be anyone left to explain it to her? Finally, the moment came. The Odysseus reached its coordinates. The final automated command was sent from the quarry. It was a simple 2-word command: execute jump. On the screen, the blip of the Odysseus vanished. Jump initiated. The Vex sensor operator reported, a flicker of surprise in his tone. Primitive FTL signature detected. They tore a hole, messy. The destination is inside our formation. The commander, Zelos, chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. A suicide run. How predictable, how boring. Target the exit coordinates. Obliterated the moment it arrives. In the quarry, no one breathed. They stared at the tactical display. A 3D map of the Vex fleet. A new icon was blinking, a red cross marking the projected exit point for the Odysseus. It was right in the middle of the fleet, less than 1,000 kilometers from the command ship, the massive, thorn-like vessel. "Here we go," Madsen whispered. Frank stared at the screen, his heart a cold, dead stone in his chest. The trap was set. The jack-in-the-box was flying through whatever hellish dimension the human jump drive used. In a few seconds, the spring would be released. Pop goes the weasel. On the bridge of the Vex Imperium flagship, the Thorn of Judgment, Supreme Commander Eklos watched the tactical display. With an emotion that approximated boredom. The bridge was not a place of frantic activity. It was silent, serene, more like a temple than a command center. The Vex crew, tall, slender beings in form-fitting silver suits, moved with an unnerving grace. Their thoughts and commands shared telepathically. The human ship was an object of mild curiosity, nothing more. Zelos had studied humanity for cycles. He had read their intercepted transmissions, their histories of endless petty conflict. They were a chaotic emotional species, clever in a brutish, primitive way. They had potential, but it was a cancerous potential. Unchecked, they would spread through the galaxy like a mold. The Imperium's actions were not cruel. They were necessary. A gardener must weed his plot. The primitive vessel will emerge from its jump in 17 of their seconds, his tactical officer projected into his mind. The concept was not spoken, but simply known. Its trajectory is suicidal. It is aimed at the nexus of our formation. Zelos steepled his long 3-fingered hands, a final, defiant firecracker. Their psychology is so transparent. They believe a noble sacrifice is a victory. It is merely a waste of resources. He turned his large black eyes to the main view screen, which currently showed the blue and white marble of the planet they were here to tame. They think with their glands, not their minds. They are ruled by chemicals and electrical spasms. There is no elegance to them. Weapons are locked on the emergence point, the tactical officer confirmed. A single cleansing beam will be sufficient. Very well, Zelos replied. Let us observe this final act of vermin defiance. Perhaps it will be instructive for the archives. He felt a ripple of amusement from his bridge crew. They had conquered 1,000 worlds. They had pacified species that could bend light with their minds. These noisy, fleshy apes from a muddy little world were a triviality. The ultimatum was a formality, a nod to the Imperium's ancient code of conduct. They always gave a species a chance to accept containment. Few ever did. It never mattered in the end. The countdown reached 0. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, space tore open. It was not the clean, silent incision of a Vex transit. It was a violent, ugly wound. A maelstrom of raw energy and distorted light erupted at the designated coordinates. It was, as Xylos had expected, brutish and unsophisticated. The Odysseus, its hull already scorched and buckled from the traumatic journey, tumbled out of the rift. Target acquired, the tactical officer stated. Firing. Before the command could be fully executed, something went wrong. The human ship did not explode. It changed. The sensors screamed, not with data, but with a flood of pure paradox, contradictory readings, impossible physics. Report, Xylos demanded, a flicker of irritation breaking his composure. Commander, I cannot. The tactical officer sent back his thought laced with a sudden jarring confusion. The ship's energy signature just vanished. All of it. The reactor, the drive, everything. It went from a massive power reading to absolute 0 in less than a nanosecond. What are you detecting in its place? Xylos pressed. Nothing, sir. I mean nothing. There is no mass, no energy, no radiation, no temperature. There is a hole in our sensor grid. It's just black. On the view screen, the image of the Odysseus was gone. In its place was a perfect sphere of blackness. It was small, no larger than the ship that had carried it, but its blackness was absolute. It did not just block the light from the stars behind it. It seemed to pull the light in. The stars near its edge appeared to bend and distort, their light curving toward the sphere as if being poured down a drain. Xylos stared, his mind for the first time in centuries struggling to categorize what he was seeing. This was not a weapon. A weapon was a release of energy. This was the opposite. This was an absence. A gravitational anomaly. His science officer reported, his mental voice tight with strain. Massive. Impossible. The object has the approximate mass of a small moon, but the volume of for nothing. It is a singularity, unshielded. A singularity, a natural black hole, but that was impossible. The chances of one appearing here now were statistically non-existent. This had to be artificial. Suddenly, the black sphere began to grow. It wasn't an explosion, it was an expansion. The boundary, the event horizon, was swelling outwards. It is consuming the wreckage of the delivery ship, the science officer noted. Its mass is increasing. What is its trajectory? Xylos demanded. It has no trajectory, Commander. It is a static point, but space-time itself is flowing into it. It is pulling us, the entire fleet. On the tactical display, arrows began to appear, showing the vectors of the Vex ships. They were all pointing toward the center, toward the growing spot of black. The nearest patrol frigate, a sleek vessel a kilometer away, began to drift, its engines firing uselessly against the tide. All ships, full power to engines. Pull away, Xylos commanded, a genuine urgency entering his thoughts for the first time. It was too late. The pull was not like a rope. It was the fabric of the universe being dragged into a cosmic sinkhole. The patrol frigate began to stretch, The nose of the ship, closer to the singularity, was being pulled faster than the tail. The view screen showed the silver hull elongating, distorting, like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. There was no sound in space, but Zelos could feel the psychic scream of the frigate's crew through the fleet's neural network. A brief, sharp spike of absolute terror. Then, silence. The ship tore apart, its pieces not exploding outward but spiraling inward, faster and faster, into the black sphere. As the pieces crossed the event horizon, they simply vanished, wiped from existence. Egler stared, his calm shattered, replaced by a cold, rising horror. The primitives, the vermin, they hadn't tried to fight, they hadn't sent a bomb. They had opened a door to hell in the middle of his fleet. The main view screen in the quarry was no longer a tactical map. It was a live feed from a deep space telescope, its lens focused on the patch of sky where the Vex fleet hung. For a long, heart-stopping moment after the Odysseus should have arrived, there was nothing, just the cold, perfect geometry of the alien ships. Frank's heart sank. Did it fail? Was it all for nothing? Then it appeared. Not a flash of light, but its opposite. A tiny pinprick of perfect black. "We have a visual," a tech called out, his voice trembling. "Event horizon confirmed. The cage is open." Frank stared, mesmerized. It was just a dot. A tiny, insignificant dot. But it felt like the most important thing in the universe. He could feel its wrongness even from 100 million miles away. It was a stain on the image, a dead pixel in the eye of God. The dot began to grow, slowly at first, then with horrifying speed. "It's feeding," Frank whispered. He knew what was happening. The maw was consuming the leftover energy of the jump and the matter of the ship that had been its prison. Each particle it devoured increased its mass, which in turn increased the size of its event horizon and the strength of its gravitational pull. It was a chain reaction of annihilation. The first Vex ship to die was a small scout frigate. On the screen it looked like it was made of taffy. The front of the ship was pulled so much harder than the back that the vessel stretched, elongated, and then tore itself apart in a process. The old books called spaghettification. The pieces of the ship, glowing hot from tidal forces, swirled around the black hole in a brief, brilliant spiral, an accretion disk of incandescent doom. Then, one by one, they winked out of existence as they crossed the event horizon. A collective gasp went through the command room. They had known what would happen. In theory, they had seen the simulations. But seeing it for real, seeing a mile-long starship get erased from reality, was something else entirely. "My God!" General Madsen breathed, her hand gripping the edge of her console so tightly her knuckles were white. The black hole, now swollen with the mass of the frigate, became a hungrier beast. Its gravitational influence expanded exponentially. The two ships closest to the first victim were the next to go. They were larger cruisers, and they fought back. Frank could see the blue-white blaze of their engines firing at full power, trying to escape the inexorable pull. It was like trying to outrun a waterfall while your boat was already in the current. Their struggle was useless. Their hulls buckled. Their structures failed. They were shredded into ribbons of glowing metal and plasma, which joined the death dance of the accretion disk before being swallowed by the nothingness. The disk around the singularity flared brighter, a halo of stolen light around a core of absolute darkness. The Vex fleet, once a model of perfect, ordered formation, was now in chaos. Ships were firing their engines in every direction, some trying to flee, others seeming to lose control and drift helplessly. The comms, which the listening post was still intercepting, were a cacophony of panicked, overlapping thoughts. The calm, superior beings had become screaming children in the dark. Gravitational tide is shearing the fleet. Hull integrity failing on multiple vessels. I can't. The navigation is gone. Space-time is bending. It's pulling the light. The stars are gone. The most horrifying part was the silence that followed each panicked report. One by one, the voices were being extinguished. Frank watched, a cold, sick feeling in the pit of his stomach. This wasn't a battle. A battle is a conflict. This was pest control. It was like watching an exterminator gas a hornet's nest. There was no struggle, no honor. Just a cold, efficient, and total eradication. He looked at the faces of the people around him. The technicians, the soldiers, the general. There was no triumph in their eyes. They had been backed into a corner and they had lashed out. But they hadn't just punched their captor. They had unleashed a thing that would burn down the whole prison, and maybe the whole world outside it too. The black hole was enormous now, a gaping wound in the sky. It was devouring ships by the dozen, their engines firing futilely, their forms distorting and breaking apart as they were dragged into the abyss. The accretion disk was a swirling vortex of unimaginable energy, a cosmic hurricane of matter being torn into its constituent atoms before being erased. Finally, the main Vex ship, the Thorn of Judgment, began to succumb. It was the furthest from the initial event, and its massive engines had fought the hardest. But even it could not escape. The long, sharp vessel began to curve, bending toward the singularity. Its prow glowed cherry red as it was superheated by the intense gravity. "They sent an ultimatum," Madsen said again, her voice a hollow echo of the words she'd spoken before pressing the button. Frank finished the thought in his own mind, the words tasting like ash. "And we sent this. This thing. This endless hunger. This plague of nothingness." He was watching the death of a fleet, the death of an army, maybe the death of an entire civilization's presence in this arm of the galaxy. And he had helped make it happen. He had checked the wires and tightened the screws. On the screen, the Thorn of Judgment finally broke. It snapped in two, and the pieces began their final, terrible spiral into the black. Supreme Commander Xylos did not feel fear. Fear was a chemical reaction, a primitive impulse of meat creatures. He felt a logical conclusion, an equation that had been solved with the answer being his own non-existence. His bridge was chaos, not a chaos of sound, but of thought. The telepathic network was a storm of raw data, sensor ghosts, and the fading, psychic screams of dying crews. He watched the view screen as the cruiser Vigilance was torn into a shimmering cloud of atoms. The light from its death spiral took a fraction of a second to reach his ship, but the death of its crew was an instantaneous psychic shockwave. 1,000 minds snuffed out at once. It was like a string being cut in a vast interconnected web. The Thorn of Judgment shuddered, a deep groaning tremor that ran the length of its mile-long hull. "Report," Xylos projected, his own thought, a beacon of icy calm in the storm. "This singularity's event horizon is expanding at a geometric rate." His science officer sent back, the thought tinged with the conceptual equivalent of a shaking voice. "Our engines cannot counteract the gravitational gradient. The forward third of the ship has passed the point of no return." The point of no return. A human concept. How fitting. Xylos looked at the blackness on the view screen. It filled the entire forward view now. It wasn't just a hole in space, it was a hole in everything. It was the universe's off switch, the humans. The vermin. They had been sitting on the Sauna, absolute weapon. While they bickered and fought amongst themselves with burning rocks and explosive chemicals, they had this abomination hidden away. It was the ultimate predator. It did not hate. It did not conquer. It did not rule. It only ate. And its appetite was the universe itself. He finally understood. The Vex Imperium saw the galaxy as a garden to be tended. They saw themselves as the gardeners, pruning the weeds, maintaining order. But humanity, they were not weeds. They were the thing the gardener fears. They were the poison you dare not use, the fire that will burn the garden and the gardener with it. They were a species that would choose to burn down the world rather than be caged. A new sensation washed over him. It was not fear, it was respect. A terrifying, profound respect. "The hull is beginning to shear," his tactical officer reported. The thought was flat, a statement of fact. All panic had been burned away, replaced by a strange final clarity. On the bridge, the lights flickered as artificial gravity stuttered, and for a moment Eklosov felt a pull, a physical drag toward the nose of the ship, toward the blackness. He watched as a hairline crack appeared on the transparent metal of the view screen. It spider-webbed outward, not from an impact, but from the very atoms of the material being pulled apart. He closed his large, dark eyes. He had lived for 1,000 cycles. He had seen the birth of stars and the death of worlds. He had considered his existence to be a part of the grand, logical order of the cosmos. He was wrong. The cosmos also contained this screaming, illogical, hungry void, and the key to it was held by the mad apes of Sol -3. His last thought was not of anger or regret. It was a single, crystal-clear realization. A final report to the silent archives of the Vex. They are not vermin. They are the keepers of the void. Then the thorn of judgment tore in half. The psychic network of the fleet went utterly silent. The front half of the bridge, including the view screen, was ripped away into the swirling, incandescent hell of the accretion disk. For an infinitesimal fraction of a second, Zelos saw reality itself dissolve into a cascade of pure energy and fractured light. Then there was nothing. No thought, no light, no time, no Xylos. He was not killed. He was erased. His existence, his memories, his 1,000 cycles of life were consumed and rendered down to a final single bit of information. Added mass to the singularity. Back in the quarry, they watched the last great ship of the Vex fleet die. The screen showed the two halves of the Thorn of Judgment making their final silent pirouette before being swallowed by the blackness. The accretion disk flared with a final furious intensity, a funeral pyre for an entire fleet. And then it began to fade. With nothing left to feed on in its immediate vicinity, the accretion disk cooled. The stolen light dimmed. The swirling vortex of matter was gone, consumed. All that remained was what had been there in the beginning. A perfect sphere of absolute black. It hung there in space, motionless, silent. A scar. A wound that would not heal. The Vex fleet was gone. Every ship, every soldier, every trace of their existence in this system had been wiped clean. There was no wreckage. There was no debris field. There were no bodies. There was only the whole. In the command center, the silence was as absolute as the void on the screen. The threat was gone. Earth was safe. Humanity had won. No one was cheering. Frank looked at the screen. at the clean, empty space where the enemy had been. He felt a profound emptiness inside himself, a hollowness that matched the image on the screen. He thought of Dr. Thorne's last whispered words. It's the end of everything. They had sent a monster to kill a monster, but the Vex were dead. Their monster was still there, and it was waiting patiently for its next meal. The silence in the quarry lasted for a full minute after the last Vex ship was gone. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, filled with the unspoken question, what have we done? The tactical display was clear. The orbit of Earth was, for the first time in weeks, free of alien symbols. All that remained was the new icon the system had automatically generated. A black circle with a red warning triangle in the middle, labeled Gravitational Anomaly, Extreme Hazard. A permanent warning sign planted in their own celestial backyard. General Madsen was the first to move. She straightened up, her shoulders seeming to carry a new, even heavier weight. She turned away from the screen, her face a pale, emotionless mask. "Report," she commanded, her voice cutting through the silence. It was strained, but it was the voice of a leader again. A young lieutenant, his face shiny with sweat, cleared his throat. "General, all Vex signatures are gone. Long-range scans show no other Vex assets in system. The anomaly is stable. It's not moving. Its mass appears constant now that there is nothing left in its immediate vicinity to consume." "It's a mine," Frank said, his voice raspy. Everyone looked at him. A mine in the shipping lanes. No one can ever go near that part of space again. We've walled off a piece of our own solar system, permanently. Madsen nodded slowly. "A necessary price. Contact the president. Tell him the threat has been neutralized." Neutralized. Such a clean, sterile word for the cosmic horror they had just witnessed. It wasn't neutralization. It was obliteration. Erasure. The hours that followed were a blur. The news was released to the world. Not the truth, not the whole truth. No one would ever be told about the more. The official story was that humanity had deployed a new, top-secret gravity weapon that had disabled the Vex fleet, causing them to retreat. The images of the vanishing ships were classified at the highest level. The world celebrated. There were fireworks in Sydney, dancing in the streets of Rio, songs in the squares of Moscow. Humanity had faced the abyss and spit in its eye. In the quarry, there was no celebration. Only the quiet, grim work of shutting down non-essential systems and archiving the data. The data of the kill. Frank sat at his console long after he was dismissed, staring at the live feed of the black hole. It was still there, a patient, perfect circle of night. He thought about the Vex. They had come as gardeners intending to prune a weed, but they had found a species that kept a bottle of acid in the cellar. A species that, when threatened with being trimmed, chose to salt the earth for 1,000 generations. Madsen found him there. She stood beside him, also looking at the screen. "You did good work, Mr. Miller," she said quietly. It wasn't praise. It was a statement of fact. You did what was asked of you. "Did we do the right thing, General?" Frank asked, not looking at her. The question was for himself as much as for her. Madsen was silent for a long time. "The right thing is a luxury for people who have choices," she said finally. "They gave us 2 doors. Behind one was a slow death in a comfortable cage. Behind the other was a button. We chose the button. That's all. History can judge us, if T here is anyone left to write it." She was about to say more, when a light on a nearby communications console began to flash. It wasn't one of the internal lines. It was the deep space listening array, the one that had been monitoring the Vex. A tech walked over to it, frowning. "That's odd," he said. "I am getting a new signal." "From where?" Madsen asked, her body instantly tense. "I don't know," the tech said, tapping at his keyboard. "It's not Vex. The signature is not Vex. The signature is different. It's not aimed at Earth. It's a wideband broadcast. A galactic broadcast, it looks like. Like a public announcement. Can you translate it?" The computer is trying. The language is complex. But the mathematical underpinning is there. It should have a rough translation in a moment. Frank and Madsen stood over the tech's shoulder, watching as words began to form on the screen. The translation was clunky, a machine's best guess at alien grammar and intent. It read, "Warning to all civilizations. The quarantine on Sol system has been breached. The primitive species within designation humanity has developed and deployed a Class 9 singularity weapon. Imperium fleet lost. Total erasure event confirmed." Frank felt a cold dread wash over him. The message wasn't from the Vex. It must have been an automated beacon, a dead man's switch triggered by the fleet's destruction. But it was the next line of the translation that made his blood run cold. The message wasn't just a report, it was an update. An update to a list. The screen flickered, and a new line of text appeared. Species designation, humanity. Threat. Classification upgraded from primitive chaotic to apex. Predator. Galactic priority, containment at all costs. Avoid. Do not engage. A new monster has been born. The tech looked up at them, his face ashen. "General, this message isn't just going out. It's being repeated, bounced off relays and other systems. It's going everywhere." Frank stared at the screen at the words. Apex Predator. They hadn't just saved themselves. They had painted a target on their back. They had told the entire, vast, unknown galaxy what they were capable of. They had screamed into the jungle, not as frightened prey, but as the thing that all other animals should fear. He looked back at the view screen, at the silent, patient black hole hanging in their sky. It was a statement, a signature. The Galactic Empire had sent an ultimatum. Humanity had sent a black hole. And the rest of the universe had just received the message. Humanity was safe for now. Humanity was alone, and the dark was full of things that now knew their name. And they were listening.